Today we're going to chat with Dr. Boris Fedoric about the challenges of developing a mentally healthy workplace and the role that rehab counsellors can play in assisting employers to achieve this. Welcome, Boris.
Thank you, Danielle. Great to have you.
Boris is co-founder of Career Bargain Work Gain, is currently chair and national president of the Australian Society of Rehabilitation Counsellors. And Boris has been involved in the compensation industry, both on the claims management and the rehab side, for over 11 years. So, he's well versed to talk about the role of rehab counsellors and the potential for their work in creating mentally healthy workplaces. So thank you for joining me today, Boris, on Pearls of Wisdom, and
Pleasure.
Really looking forward to hearing your contribution on this important topic. I mean, Boris, as we know, and we've sort of discussed, this area is a growing one of mental health issues in Australia. 3/4 of people are saying that mental health is an important consideration when they're applying for a job. And a half believe that employers should be doing more in this space. And we know that there is an increasing push for employers to do more in this space, and that's moving into the legal requirement as well. It's being written into law. We also know that through PwC, cost-benefit analysis, that for every dollar an employer invests, $2.30 can be sort of the average return. So there's a fiscal positivity sort of there for an employer to do it. So it begs the question, therefore, why aren't employers jumping at doing it? So what are their barriers and how can they be helped to do that? So I'd love to hear your input on how you think rehab counsellors can assist, in that space. So, do you consider that the rehab industry can play a role in rehab counsellors in creating mentally healthy workplaces?
Oh, definitely, Danielle. And I think the stats are quite compelling that you presented, and that's something that we've been seeing as well. From my perspective, and I think if we talk about rehab providers in general, rehab providers generally consist of, rehab counsellors, you've got the OTs, you've got the physios, you've got the psychologists, and so forth. And I think rehab providers themselves, they're probably very, very, very well positioned to do that because you've got the variety of skill set that's located with one institution, I guess, or one business. And we work across injuries that have occurred. And I think from the learning perspective, if you engage various allied health providers that work with that particular rehab provider, you can see from psychological point of view what went wrong, from a physical point of view what went wrong, from OT perspective, exercise physiology, all that sort of wellness stuff as well. And you can actually work backwards and do some reverse engineering to see when things do go wrong on that reductionist level, what actually manifests as a result, and which we know are workplace injuries, such as bullying and harassment and all sorts of other psychological injuries that come from it.
Yeah.
So I would say quite well positioned to do that.
Yeah. I mean, look, absolutely. And obviously rehab counsellors are involved at the moment primarily in the injury management process, so helping someone get back to work. Obviously, when they're doing that, they've got that ability to assess see what's going on in a workplace at the time. So, it would seem to me that they're very well placed or well versed to be able to determine the mental health of a workplace. So do you see that involvement can translate to sort of maybe a new area that they can move into of work?
Oh, absolutely. And I think from the perspective of the psychosocial risks and one of the aspects of rehab counselling which is quite not well known, and we are trying to do better from ASOC's perspective, is raising awareness about what rehab counselling is. Quite often we are mistaken for providers that just come in, write resumes and off you go, whereas that's only maybe a 1% of what we do. And I think there's been a great paper coming out of Griffith University that shows using resumes is actually a therapeutic tool for counselling. So yes, we do that, but we use it as a therapeutic to raise the motivation and self-confidence and all that sort of stuff from a biopsychosocial perspective. But when we do see pre-injury workplaces, why and how this injury happened, you can actually start to see the common denominators. And those common denominators are the good old, no one cares, I'm overworked, high KPIs, there's just not enough time pressures, no one talks to me, the boss is putting pressure on, i.e. bullying, and all that sort of stuff. What we see is when we then develop a graduated return to work plans, we talk to the employer, we talk to the injured worker, we become that sort of a mediator almost in that instance. And then you can actually start to really see what went wrong. Then the employer will say, well, I didn't have time to do this. Then the worker says, well, I didn't know that you needed that. Well, I didn't know you needed that. It comes down to perceptions. It comes down to lack of communication, and the KPIs themselves. Yes, they're great as indicators of what we need to do. But also at the same time, like I always say, when I have these meetings, everybody's different. Yes. You look at something like, the Marmot study in 2010, where they talk about the social determinants of health. You can see the huge scope of different social determinants and how that impacts of someone's well-being and how their health is going to look like in the future. But then same should be applied for work. When we do vocational assessments, for example, you look at the occupational interest searches, you look at work aspect preferences, you look at, plus or minus personality assessment, DISC or whatever you use. And that is to match the personality to that job.
Yes.
But also importantly, we need to match the personality of a human being to that another human being that's working there. And I guess that's the interview part. So if you've got these personalities combined with a poor social determinants of health, you can't really be then having the same blanket KPIs for everybody, because that is really a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And something as simple that occurred last week, where an individual with a workplace injury has the same picking rate as somebody else who is, fit and healthy in their 20s compared to somebody who's 60 and with a whole bunch of comorbidities. Now, you don't need to be a scientist to work out that 95% pick rate in those cases. We can work out which one is not going to go well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Boris, if I was a rehab counsellor and I was sort of thinking I'd like to do more work in this space, what would you be suggesting the skills that I'd want to advance, to move into this space, to do more work with employers to develop mentally healthy workplaces?
Good question. I think I was thinking about this probably, I would say about 6 months ago. We had some conversations with Safe Work SA, and they delivered a PD event for ASOC. And since that, I've been thinking about this. And I think in addition to obviously our counselling services that we provide as rehab counsellors, as allied health professionals, we also, study research. So I think having that ability to research in terms of those health research topics, we can quite well do that. Having the ability to do vocational assessments and understand the world of work, that's a very unique intricacy of someone who's doing counselling. And I think the most important is we love to work in systems, frameworks, processes. We thrive, the insurance, the health system, disability, and so forth. But one of the things, what I was really thinking from the training perspective as well as the practice, we do a lot of not treatment, but we provide services that have therapeutic benefits. Yeah. But in doing so, there's that, neuroplasticity and changes in neurotransmitters and so forth, which leads to therapeutic effects as such. But one thing that we don't probably do as much of is the workplace health and safety aspect. So understanding and doing those risk assessments themselves, which the workplace health and safety guys do really well. And I think probably from perspective of, like the ergonomic type assessments, not for us to be doing those sorts of things, but understand in a greater depth the biomechanics and so forth. I think we're quite doing well with the biopsychosocial approaches, and we're doing extremely well with the psychosocial approaches. But I think having that risk assessment component to our training and to our further development, as well as the physical aspect of things, understanding biomechanics and body movements, I think those are the sorts of things that I think will be quite useful to a rehabilitation counsellor.
So doing some training in that sort of work health and safety prevention systems and hazard management risk assessment area, because obviously with an employer, they always need to put some figures and justification around decision making, and you can do that using the hazard assessment risk ID process. So, which is not something that many rehab counsellors would be overly familiar with.
No, it's not. It's not really at the forefront of our mind.
Yeah.
I certainly have done those, but it's not something that I predominantly do. I mean, I would do it on a particular cases or when you get engaged with a large employer who does want to make a change. And I think this is an important part. Employers need to want to make that change in their workplace. And then when you start assessing, and the best way of doing that is then you start assessing people, you start assessing jobs, you start doing the cross-sectional analysis, and it takes a lot of time. But I would think, the risk assessment side of things, that will probably be important.
So obviously a major step in sort of system and thinking would be if rehab counsellors could actually, in the service delivery that they've got, have the capacity to do a bit of preventative work with employers. So, because prevention is definitely better than cure. And if an employer is having people, so certainly ongoing numbers of people being bullied or harassed or whatever, to do some work in that preventative space would be highly economic, I would have thought, for the schemes even.
Oh, yeah, because, you're absolutely right, because we know when things do go wrong, they go wrong pretty bad.
Yes.
And especially, and I know you well, Danielle, we've both had cases that were, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years long. And when you're really,
Back in the old...
I was focusing on more acute things. But when you look at those cases, you look at the, and I know we've done that. We've analysed going all the way back, and you look at what went wrong, and it's that psychosocial risk that hasn't been managed at the front. And we always ask that question: if we could have just changed that one bit, we would have done it so much better. And so the answer is absolutely yes, because we know that when things really go wrong, you can see that they really go wrong. And, cases of 15 years, nobody can convince me that could be any good coming out of that.
No, absolutely. So what about ASOC, Boris? What role do you see they can play in this upskilling of consultants?
Well, I think from ASOC's perspective, being a member organisation, we are quite heavily focused on professional development, and obviously liaising to various stakeholders and raising awareness of our profession. I think that's something that over this year and next year we really want to focus on even more intensely than we did previous 2 years. We're sitting in a lot of important tables now. We're getting there. So I'm really pleased with the traction that we've got at the moment. But I think in line with what I said before, providing potentially some further training in those spaces in workplace health and safety. I mean, at the moment, we've got the module for biopsychosocial approach, which we're kind of finishing up. And there's also some talk about doing a vocational assessment aspects of it. So those sorts of things are quite important. And we know there's a quite strong emphasis on biopsychosocial management. So we thought, providing to our members further training and education from specialists in that area that have decades of experience, both learnt experience and practiced experience, will be quite useful. But certainly, taking on board the whole workplace health and safety risk assessment type training would be really useful. And we always welcome anybody that has any ideas, understanding obviously what rehab counsellors do. Whoever has any ideas to come forward to us, and you can email us and reach out, and we'll be more than happy to organise a meeting and discuss any professional development. We have webinar programs, so anybody's really welcome to put their hand up.
I'm familiar with those.
Absolutely. To deliver those. And I think that is so important. And even these sessions, talking about this sort of stuff is quite important, especially for the new rehabilitation counsellors that are coming into this industry. We used to do a lot of work in primary health and so forth, and I'm not going to bore you with a history of rehab counselling, but we've got a very strong roots in social justice, disability, the primary health, and there's a research coming out of, I believe, University of Sydney and some in Queensland about using rehabilitation counsellors in hospitals at the moment. And I think those are the places that, we used to be there at some point, and something has happened and we're not there. So we need to get back into those environments, and because the cost benefit analysis, as you've said before, is tremendous, and it's huge. So as ASOC, we're always very happy to provide professional development. In addition to obviously the advocacy that we do for our members.
Yeah. So Boris, just finishing up. So from your experience, with a variety of employers, and obviously you've worked across many, what do you see as the main challenges that employers have got in creating a mentally healthy workplace?
From challenges, I mean, you've got about 3 hours.
In a nutshell.
So there's nothing, there's nothing worse than saying to a scientist, can you tell me about this? And it's like, yeah, no worries, I'll make it short. Do you have 3 hours?
Tell me about the immune response or something.
The immune response, yes. Well, I think, look, I'll probably talk about neuroscience a bit, but if we think about, quite often people think, and I think I've probably commented on one of the posts as well on LinkedIn, but one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions that we have is that the mentally healthy workplaces equals cost.
Yes.
I don't think that's the case. Okay. I don't think that you need to be reinventing the whole organization and doing these things. There's a lot of neuroscience research that's come out, and it's coming out about, even as simple things, and you probably know about this with your emotional intelligence resilience training that you do. Gratitude.
Absolutely.
Writing, not as much as in writing letters of gratitude, but receiving those letters of gratitude
Expressing gratitude.
Reconnect your wiring and get your prefrontal cortex to work differently. And, you generally feel better. And when they do scans of people that have and have not had this, you can see certainly the brain activity changes. And I think what's more important is that some of these effects are also permanent. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to keep on going and seeing a consultant and coming back and seeing it. This is something that you can practice, but the employers need to be aware of these things. And I think that's where we, as a rehab counsellors or yourself, we come into play, where we provide tools. And then it's on to the employer to really manage that and do that well. Inexpensive. And if you've asked me a question before, what can rehab counsellors do? But I can certainly tell you that in 99% of the cases that have had, psychological injury or physical injury that led to a psychological injury as a result, it is the lack of occupational bonding.
Yes.
Which means communication. Communication wasn't there to start off with, or communication was there to start off with, and then it's just got broken over time. But it doesn't cost much. Structure.
And that leads me to, if we talk about the hierarchy of human needs, love, connection, and belonging is right there just above our basic, physical needs for food, water, et cetera, et cetera. So we need for that to be replicated in workplaces. We need connection with people. We need to feel like we belong. We need to feel respected, et cetera. So that, that ties in exactly with what you're talking about.
That's right. You do not need to change logos and brands. And
it costs nothing.
It costs nothing. This sort of stuff costs nothing. Providing advice, providing some basic tools, writing a letter of gratitude. I mean, could that be a text message that you send to staff, personalized? Can that be a phone call? That does not cost you much. But I think it's getting into this routine and understanding that a simple gesture can lead a long way.
Particularly from your leaders, Boris, particularly from people who are leading you. I mean, it's good between co-workers, but also when people get that from their leadership team, that's enormous.
Oh, absolutely. And again, us as rehab counsellors, we love to go and say, remember that case when I had? But this is one of those examples where it literally just needed a phone call from the employer to say, hey, mate, I think you're doing a top job. Sorry, I haven't spoken to you in like 2 months, but I didn't want to really bug you because I thought, the work cover takes over from now. I really didn't know.
Yes.
And that's it. And that one sentence changed and created a better mentally healthy workplace for that individual. How much did that cost?
Altogether, yeah.
Exactly. 10 minutes of my time to suggest that. Yeah. What is that at the rehab rate? Plus a phone call from an employer. Under $100, you've potentially solved the problem there. It's inexpensive, but it's having consultants like yourself go in there and say these sorts of things and develop a basic protocol of what to do. Yeah. And then if you really want to go high end, then you can add to it. But I think sticking up to the basics. If you look at the injury management principles as well, that's something that we really strongly work against as a rehab counsellor. And there's best practice injury management principles, early intervention, occupational bonding. You mentioned before, respect and dignity. That goes into that motivation, gratitude, and so forth. And then collaborative and comprehensive approach.
Yeah.
Collaborative means engaging with somebody. So it's making those phone calls, doing those phone calls that count is probably a good first step.
Yeah, absolutely.
How to do that, though, it's a person dependent. I think that's why us as counsellors come through and look at various personalities and look at various methods of how one person may perceive that and so forth. So there's the science aspect to it. And yes, that has to be a science. It's not just everybody start calling everybody.
Some people just need coaching in that, let's face it. They just need coaching in how to speak. From my experience, a number of employers are scared they're going to say the wrong thing or say it in the wrong way and that sort of stuff. So sometimes they just need coaching to get the confidence to do it. But look, we could talk about this all day, no doubt, but I don't want to take up the rest of your time. So thank you very much. That's
pleasure.
And I'm sure rehab counsellors will get a lot out of this discussion. And, particularly thinking about their own future and where they can develop and where they can progress too as well.
It's a great career, Danielle. You're absolutely right. And there's a lot of employers that we speak to and they keep knocking on our doors saying, could we please have rehabilitation counsellors? It's exactly for these aspects. We provide counselling. We can understand the research and methodology. We understand the vocational aspects, injury management, disability. When things really go wrong, we understand it. And systems. So this really taps nicely into what you're trying to achieve with the mentally healthy workplaces. And I agree, prevention is way better than us seeing those cases 15 years later.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Boris. Thanks for your time. Sure, hopefully we can chat another time.
Agree. Take care. Okay. All the best.
Thanks. Bye.
See you.